Hello, welcome back to another Pen Talk. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for spinning that dial in my direction as you explore YouTube and I explore the wide world of pens. And we have a new pen in front of you. I gave a sneak preview of this pen, and this seems to be the viewer's choice for the pen to review. And yes, it's a Majohn, as we see through this typical frosted box, but it's actually embossed with Majohn on the side, so the mold to make this has been changed from Moonman to Majohn. But if we flip it over, we'll still see Moonman on the label. They must have billions of these labels all printed up. And there is your nice inventory tag. But let's look at the pen. Mr. Sizemore says, yes, look at the pen, look at the pen. Okay. It's a booklet we've seen a lot of times, no need to look at it now. Pen's in a nice little cellophane sleeve to protect it, and we bring it out and we go, wow. Not much sound from that cellophane sleeve. A very nice resin. So I had 4 colors to choose from. Here's the 4 colors. Yes, it's an N8, a new model, but it looks familiar. Screw to post, but there's a roll stop there. So they've made a new change to the pen, changed the dimensions slightly. We'll do some historical perspectives on this style of pen. Roll stop makes it easy to count the number of turns to take off the cap, and it's about 1 1/4, and we'll see, whoa, what's that? It's a glass nib. And the color of the glass nib kind of goes with the color of the pen. And that metal ring there between the section and the barrel is also something new. And we'll look at the threads, and the threads are like more of a block thread, which is nice. But if we look inside the box, we'll see a nib. It's a Delike nib. So I think Delike, Moonman, and Majohn are kind of all the same company. And we see the world's smallest converter. But we're going to explore those in addition to the pen and the glass nib. It's not my first Majohn glass nib, but I do appreciate you get this whole setup with a nice pen, the barrel and screws, and we'll see a metal insert there, which is not typical of this brand. I think this is the first one of these style that I've seen with that. Most of the time they're all acrylic because you would want to eyedropper this. I think you could still eyedropper it as long as the ink wasn't too aggressive and as long as that plating was slightly resistant to the ink. But this is not a glass nib that you could use if you filled it with ink because it's a solid piece. And as we expect, it just unscrews, and we'll see how solid it is. But I've used these in the past, and I've been very happy with them. I use them particularly for my ink sampling. I like it better than a dip pen, and it's easier to clean off when you're testing a bunch of inks. So that's the pen. So we'll explore its cousins and close relatives, and we'll also see how this one writes. So that resin is very nice, and I would call it more like a cellulose acetate acrylic. There's a lot of names you can call those resins, but they did a nice job with it, and I like that cracked ice design in that kind of very deep red color. Nice. So here's some pens I brought in for comparison. First one here is what I would call the original that I am aware of with this design. I'm certain there's been many of them because the design is a classic design. The Moonman Wonkai. Of course, I got it in this mint with the white ribbon. Then there was Maripu pen that came out with this version, a little bit longer. Not as long as this new one, but similar. And screwed to post, as you can see, the threads on the end. And not to be outdone, Pen BBS came out with their version, the 471. And of course, I had to show the Miango version of it for Dean so she could see it. And here's another version of the Moonman design. No roll stop, no screw to post, but the barrel is long enough to use as is. And this also came with a glass nib. And here is a pen that I think has a similar style of resin, which will compare a little bit more closely with the N8. This is that Delight Moonman Kaweco style. So let's take the caps off and look at them posted if they do post. So here they are posted with the screw-to posts here. And I put the metal ring for the 471 because you can put the metal ring here, it can be here, or you can not use the metal ring at all. It gives you a lot of versatility, but I like the balance of the pen with the metal ring here in the middle. The Pen BBS is also the only one with a number 6 size nib, so it's the largest nib of this group. And most of these other nibs are either labeled Delight or Iridium Point. This may have been replaced. I played around a lot with this pen. This pen was inked up in daily use for probably close to 2.5 years. Eventually I cleaned it out and put it aside because I had a lot of other pocket pens that I was using, and I didn't use as many pocket pens as I wasn't traveling as much. And the length of these, you can see this one without posting because it doesn't post, is still pretty usable, about the same as the Wonkai. And the new N8 is a nicely long pen posted. In fact, it accommodates a cartridge or a converter. Probably just a converter. I haven't played around with cartridges. As you may have remembered from my Sailor video, I'm not a cartridge person. And this resin I thought was very nice. This pen came and went relatively quickly. The 471s still show up occasionally. So that's it. Let's zoom in a little bit on that nibbed section because I think that's the important part. So as one would expect with a small pocket pen, there's not going to be a large section on any of these. The 471 is about the largest, but not by a lot. The Wonkai is also a good size. This is on the slim side, slim side, slim side, and this is kind of in between the larger and smaller ones. These nibs are all extra fines and fines except for the medium that's on the Pen BBS, which I really do enjoy their medium nibs. And the extra fine nib came with the new N8. I let the glass nib in there just to make certain you can easily tell the difference between this pen and the rest of them. I certainly do like writing with these, but they're not something you're going to write a novel with, and they are really good for just taking notes with, carrying around with you as a knock-around everyday carry pen. I wanted to compare the resins in these two pens because I think they share some similarity, but on closer examination, this Delight pen, cellulose acetate, I do think is what it says it is. And I do think this is more of a turned acrylic, that cracked ice design in it. And we're going to bring in the LED to see if we can show up any more details in these two resins. So we have very little light coming in, but the camera adjusts automatically. But let's bring in the LED and play it on these resins. Yeah, they are definitely different. And there's a little bit of chatoyancy or depth in the N8 resin compared to the Delight brown resin. Both of them have their appeal, at least to my eyes. So let's look at this resin alone underneath of the LED. And if we go inside the cap, we'll see how the red bits, chunks, and the opaque black chunks come into play. And it's nice how that light shines through the top of the cap. If we take a look inside the cap, we'll see that classic machined ledge. And we'll also see that little bump there from the roll stop that's been inserted into a hole drilled in the cap, and I'm assuming glued in place, not going to come out. Should seal up well. I've had no issues with drying out in this design with the other pens, but then they don't have a roll stop. I could play on this resin and look at it for a long time. I like it. For those of you that may have thought I forgot about the recent version of the Moonman Wonkai, here they are in two very interesting finishes, resins, colors. I did a full review on these. They'll be in my pocket pen playlist. But they didn't change anything. Same threads here, same size and dimensions, unlike the N8, which changes it a lot in the design. And I appreciate how they've done that. And so does Mr. Sizemore. 4 pens for 4 eyes. So we all know how an extra fine Delike number 5 nib writes. There's lots of examples of that nib. So I think we should look at the glass nibs, and for reference, I have here a Delike New Moon that I've been using with this glass nib for a while to do ink sampling. Different shape and style to the glass nib than on the N8. So the glass nib on the Delike New Moon is definitely shaped differently and also has a different texture to it. They're both the same assembly, so you can easily interchange these. And you'll notice down here at the end of the section, there's a small O-ring, which I added to both of these. And the reason why I added it was when I was preparing this video, I wanted to remove this glass nib from the barrel. And it was very, very difficult to get out. When I finally got it out, I found that a lot of ink had come up along the side of this nib collar, and when it dried, it kind of acts like a glue and made it hard to get it out. And also that sometimes could dilute ink samples when you do these for doing ink sampling. So that little O-ring will definitely help seal it, and you can feel it when you tighten down this glass nib. You can feel that final little quarter turn where that O-ring engages. I also put a tiny bit of silicone grease here and also on the threads here, just to make it easier to take these nibs out when you want to do an exchange. But the main thing that I notice is the surface of this new glass nib is kind of rough, and it seems to hold ink better than this clear, smooth surface glass nib. So they've made certainly some changes to it, and I think this shape works well. Both of these nibs, like I say, can be interchanged. And I have also other Moonman glass nibs that I bought because I think they're just good to have as an option. I used to have glass nib pens made all out of glass, and I broke every one of them, so that's not an option. And these have lasted for a long time, and they've been in use a lot. We need to look at these two sections because I have a question for Majohn Delike. Why did you put this metal insert here instead of just having it all be turned acrylic? Because it kind of like puts a dampener on doing an eyedropper, even though they do give you a tiny converter that holds a really small amount of ink. So my thought is that it might be less money to use this pre-made metal piece that has the threads on the inside to accommodate the nib assembly, the threads here in the end of the nib assembly, and might be less than doing these sections with the threads both inside and outside. So, and it does add a little bit of weight to the end of the pen near the writing part, so that I think also adds to the feel and balance of the writing. But I don't know, I think this is a manufacturing decision, not an aesthetic decision. And one might feel that this is more of an upscale version because that metal adds strength to this area, but also provides an area of stress because plastic to metal sometimes can just break. I've had that happen on a few pens of mine. And I've not had any acrylic sections like one piece like this one break on me. So that's my question. And also, if any of my viewers would like to chime in and have their opinions as to why they made that change, I'd appreciate you sharing your ideas about it. So another design change is they changed these fine threads for the cap and barrel to these block threads, which I think is a move in the right direction. You have less turns for engagement. It feels better when you thread it because those threads have less contact area. This one just is a push to post, and it doesn't post very well, where this is a screw to post, which is very secure once you put the cap on the end of the barrel. So I give them credit for the changing those threads I think it works well. And then you can see where that metal ring from that metal piece on the section does add a little bit of aesthetics to the pen, but not to me in any positive way. So what ink to use for these glass nib pens? We're going to use this ink, called out to me. I think it really matches the dark red of the N8 pen, and it's a very saturated ink. I have used this as an everyday ink for a while in a few pens, but then it kind of got forgotten about, but now I'm bringing it back into play. Yes, it is a very deep red, and I needed to show the chromatography because it's a very consistent deep red color. It's very intense at the very top. Very unusual for a lot of inks nowadays. There's so many different ingredients and colors that the chromatography shows, but this just pretty much shows a very consistent dye used in this ink. My friend Dean sent me this very nice Moss Park Green collection, these very small bottles from Ferris Wheel Press. Can't really fit a pen in there, but the glass nib fits in there well and allows me to get my ink book set up with some writing. And here's the examples of the writing. One of the things that the glass nib does is it doesn't have any flex or anything else associated with it. So it doesn't have those attributes, but it does lay down a very consistent line. And I like it for doing these ink samplings because I use the same nib for all of this writing, and then you can get a little bit better idea of the ink and how it looks on the paper. There's a little bit of a close-up of that writing. Hopefully you find it interesting. So I would be remiss if I didn't discuss the nib that comes with the pen and the converter. But I'm also going to add an O-ring, and as you see, I have a bag of O-rings, various sizes that I've used consistently. And these are the small ones that I'm going to use on this nib assembly to slide it down. So this is that small converter. You can see it fits very securely on the end of that nipple. Yes, it does fit very securely. Hard to put on when it's not in the section. But as we can see, it's a standard cartridge, standard international cartridge, so that'll easily fit in there too if you wanted to use a cartridge. And the cartridge will hold a lot more ink than the converter will. As you can see, probably almost twice as much. And these push-pull converters are not my favorite, but they do work, and you maximize the amount because you don't have any mechanisms there to move and displace what you would have for movement of that piston. I also have to confirm that that little O-ring there, when this is all put together, seals up well, so no ink gets in between the section and that nib collar, because I've used this glass nib a lot, dipped it very deeply, as you'll see when I do my writing sample, and no ink got up here. So success to my engineering addition to this pen. So that's the alternatives, and yes, that is a very fine nib, very extra fine nib. As I mentioned, I've done a lot of writing with these types of nibs. Not my favorites, but they do work well. And for a knock-around everyday carry pen, an extra fine nib is the perfect nib in my mind. This is what it looks like assembled with the nib. And yes, I had to put a lot of pressure on it, but it's easier to install it when you have that nice metal section there at the top of the section that lets you guide it in place. But it's very, very secure once it is in place, which is a good thing. And there's that little agitator ball, which, yeah, I'm not a fan of one way or the other, but it's better than the spring because that doesn't hold a lot of ink when you try to swap out the ink after you've used the converter. So before we write with the glass nib, let's have some editorial comments about this pen. My first comment is it's a great value, great deal. Here's that listing on AliExpress. For that price, you get this wonderfully machined, nice acrylic pen with a good roll stop on it. You get a glass nib, an extra fine steel nib, and a really tiny converter in addition to that in a nice box. So I don't think you can beat that deal and that price. And this is that minimalistic design. You don't really feel that transition from cap to barrel. It's all the same dimensions, straight design. Some people like it, some people don't. I happen to enjoy that design. The cap comes off in at 1 1/4 turns. We'll give you the dimensions of the pen. Definitely a pen I would use posted, and the fact that it screws to post very securely, very nice, fits well in the hand, feels good, nice balance. So that's all in favor. You do feel that edge between where the end of the section and the threads transition to the barrel, and that could have been just chamfered a little bit to take that sharp edge off, but they didn't. Hey, it's a $14 pen. That section's a little on the small side. We'll give you the dimensions of the section, but for me, it's usable. This is not a pen I'm going to be writing novels with. It's a pocket pen. It's an everyday carry pen. So good for jotting notes down, a few paragraphs here and there. And that's where I think it shines, and that's where I think it has its value in anyone's collection. Now we're going to see how this nib writes with that burgundy ink compared to the original D-like glass nib that I have. So the glass nib is easy to use. You take the cap off of the ink, always a good first step. You take the glass pen and you dip it in all the way up to the top of the glass nib. You bring it up, you see that the nib has collected ink. I always do a little bit on the side, and I also do this one more time just to get a nice coating of ink on there, as you can see we have, and let's write with it. Well, unfortunately, when I did my first writing with the glass nib, which we see here, it didn't record properly. So we're going to miss out on hearing the initial writing sound, which was pretty strong. The nib had a lot of feedback and a lot of noise writing on paper. I didn't like it. Did lay down a nice dark line, almost a medium to a medium broad, and it holds a lot of ink, so it puts down a lot of writing. Next, we're going to smooth out the glass nib. Hadn't thought about that, and see how it writes then. So I just use this nail board like I would use for my regular nibs, but with a glass nib, I turn it 360 degrees to cover all the ends of that nib. And after doing that, I'm happy to report that the nib now writes much smoother. You're still going to hear it on the paper, but it doesn't have as much feedback or as much drag on the paper as it did before. I'm certain over time I could work on it, but just probably a lot of writing is going to clean it up. But this definitely can be a nib that I will use to sample ink. Let's take a look at how it compares to the other glass nib. So another snafu, when I wrote down the rating, I didn't have sound originally. So I gave it a 9.3. I gave it 2 checks for the build, the design, the look. 1 check for having a glass nib and an extra fine nib, so you get 2 nibs. And 1 check, which actually should be more than 1, for value. I think this is a great value for the price, a good buy. You can experience 2 different nibs, the glass and the extra fine, and you get a nice pocket pen with a roll stop. Say no more. So I dip this into the ink. It doesn't hold as much ink as the other nib did because of the way the surface is, but this is much smoother. You don't get any of that drag that you get with the other nib. It's a little bit of a finer line than you got with this nib. So writing, I definitely like this nib writing, but I'll work on the other one because I like the way it holds ink. So thank you for watching. we're coming to the end of this video. Hopefully you've enjoyed, again, something a little bit different. Some of you may have thought about glass nibs. Some of you may even have them and use them. They have the place in our fountain pen world, and I found the place that works well for me. Hope this video finds you safe, healthy, and happy, enjoying your pens, inks, paper, and a wide variety of nibs that we have to choose from. If you reach the end of this video, and we will say bye, as this glass nib is running low on ink and the color's getting lighter. Have a great day.